Assalamualaikum and good evening to Dr. Rahaya, my fellow classmates. I am Nurusha Zwani binti Shafi'i and my partner is Ho Yanyi. For today, we are going to present on our topic, which is research and language teaching, studying the teacher. The research article that we have chosen is Exploring the Consequences of Teachers' Self-Efficacy, a case of teachers of English as a foreign language. The researchers involved is Goudarz, Alibakhshi, Fariborz, Nikdel, and Akram, Labbaf. First of all, we are going to look at the summary of the research article. The researcher Alibakhshi, Nikdel, and Labbaf explored the consequences of teachers teaching self-efficacy by investigating what traits, variables, or construct might be affected as the results of teachers' self-efficacy. According to the researchers, previous studies have shown that majority of the studies on teachers' self-efficacy or TSE are done in quantitative method. Therefore, the researchers believe an interpretative tool such as ethnography and grounded theory might provide a better understanding among EFL teachers in regard to teachers' self-efficacy. A qualitative method was employed where they collected data through semi-structured interview with 20 EFL teachers as participants of the study, and the participants were selected through purposive sampling methods. The interviews were analyzed using thematic content analysis. Findings of the study showed that self-efficacy have different consequences, which are pedagogical, learners-related, and psychological. Each consequence has several subcategories. The researcher concluded that high self-efficacy affect teachers' teaching practices, learners' motivations, and achievement. It also affects teachers' burnout status, psychological being, and their job satisfaction. They hope that this study will be beneficial for teachers, trainers, and administrators of educational setting in terms of theory and pedagogy practices. Next, we are going to look at the analysis of the research article. In the first part of the analysis, we are going to look at the title first, which is Exploring the Consequences of Teachers' Self-Efficacy, a case of teachers of English as a foreign language. So the dependent variable is consequences and the independent variable is teacher self-efficacy. So based on the title, we can see that the researchers have managed to specify the subject, which is EFL teacher, and the scope of the study very clearly. And the scope is teachers' self-efficacy. They also include independence and dependent variables in the title. They also use relevant terms in the study. There is no use of jargon and abbreviations. The researcher also managed to indicate the relationship between the variables in the title, and the title is written in declarative statements. There is a use of recent nomenclature from the research area. There is a correct use of grammar, punctuations, and capitalizations in the title. It is also written in a direct and clear manner. And the researcher also managed to use an adequate amount of words of 16 words for the title. In the research article, 16 and below is considered a good amount of words to use for your research title. Okay, next we are going to look at the publications of the research article. Number one is type of journal article is original research, and the type of research is qualitative research. The publisher of this research article is Springer Science and Business Media BV, and the publication date is December 2020. The source is Asian Pacific Journal of Second and Foreign Language Education, and this research paper is indexed in Scopus database. In order to be indexed in Scopus database, a research article should have met several criteria in several categories needed as listed in the content policy and selections of Scopus database. So this paper have managed to meet the criteria needed to be indexed in Scopus database. Next, we are going to look at the authors of the research. Two authors are credible researchers. They have credentials and affiliated with reputable organizations. They have published research articles which qualified them to write the research paper. So for the first researcher, Goudarz Alibakhshi, he has published 29 research articles. He is an assistant professor at Alabama Tabata University, and he is specialized in EFL and cognitive science. For the second researcher, who is Fariborz Nikdel, he has published 7 research articles and worked as a lecturer in Goudarz University, and he specialized in psychology. The third researcher, who is Akram Labbaf, he is a co-author for 2 research articles, and there is not enough evidence to prove his credibility as a researcher. Next, we will proceed with the abstracts of the research paper. Number 1, the abstract followed the inbred pattern, which is started with intro, which includes problem statements and objective, followed by methods, results, analysis, and conclusion. And this abstract is not too long. It's within 150 words, and it's written in 1 paragraph. It included not more than 5 relevant keywords. The abstract followed all the needed requirements for a good abstract, which, number 1, it summarizes the aim, findings, and purpose of the article briefly with 130 word count. Number 2, it minimized the use of abbreviations and do not cite references in the abstract. There is minimal use of abbreviations like EFL teachers, and there is no citation used in the abstract. Number 3, only 3 to 10 keywords are used to represent the main content of the article, where in this research, only 4 relevant keywords are used. The type of this research abstract is informative. It summarizes every aspect of the study. It is also an unstructured abstract, as there is no explicit heading that show which part of the abstracts you are writing. Okay, next we are going to look at the abstract writing. The abstract is written accurately and concisely and only include the important content. It is written in a clear and direct manner. It also uses highly relevant terms which are pertinent to the search results. And the abstract also includes the most significant results, and there is no use of in-text citation. It is also written in the past tense, as the research is already being done. Now, we will look at the introduction. We will look at the pattern of the introduction, which go from broad research area to particular research focus. So let's take a look at it. It started with self-efficacy as a socio-effective concept explained by Bandura, who is the founding father of self-efficacy, followed by students' achievement as a positive effect of TSE, and factors influencing TSE such as job satisfaction, perfectionism, and emotional intelligence. And it goes narrower with explanations on teachers' burnout as a negative effect of TSE, followed by problem statement, research objective, and research questions. So based on the introduction, in the introduction itself, we can see that the problem statement is, it is not known how TSE might affect the teacher's status and what consequences TSE might have for them. And the research objective is to explore what traits, variables, or constructs might be affected as the results of teacher self-efficacy. And the research questions is, what are the consequences of Iranian teacher self-efficacy? So overall, we can see that the intro goes from a broad to a narrow research focus, which also include problem statement, research objective, and research questions. As we can see in the table, there is 1 citation from year 1977 in self-efficacy as a social effective concept, and 6 citations for students' achievement as a positive effect of teacher self-efficacy, which dated from 1992 to 2010. As for the factors influencing TSE, as mentioned before, there is 1 citation for job satisfaction, 1 for perfectionism, and 2 for emotional intelligence. In contrast, teachers burnout as a negative effect of teacher self-efficacy has 2 citations. The researchers also explain that there are extensive studies done on teacher self-efficacy with 21 citations dated from 1986 to 2015. and there are multiple in-text citations used in the intro. The researchers follow the APA format in the in-text citation by placing the citation within parentheses in alphabetical order and semicolon. The researchers also highlight the most direct relevant works to the research topic to emphasize the researcher's argument. The researcher also managed to provide evidence of literature review that is relevant and recent, and critically appraising works of other researchers. And the researchers also managed to provide background information on the study to orientate the readers to the problem. Besides, the researchers have written the objective of the study clearly. They are also able to provide rationale for the study that justifies it needs to explore the gap in the literature. In addition, the researchers have placed the study within the large context of the literature. They also managed to create readers' interest to the topic by focusing on the consequences of teacher self-efficacy and presented it in a clear and direct manner. Based on the intro, we can see that the researchers reach out to specific audience, which are the EFL teachers. They also managed to establish the problem that leads to the study. And lastly, the researchers managed to come up with a researchable research questions. However, the researchers were unable to provide sufficient evidence. As you can see in the given citation, as what 2018 believed among the studies on teacher self-efficacy which collected qualitative methods, 24 of the method employed mixed method studies. While the original research clearly stated that the qualitative means that is being used is semi-structured interview, where 24 out of 44 studies under review use mixed method studies, and the study discussed a review of literature of TSE from 2005 to 2016. So we believe that it will be better if the researcher mentioned the time span for the study that they refer to and how many studies involved to see how many researchers have used mixed method study and how many does not use the mixed method studies. Moreover, the researchers also include self-citation with no supporting evidence, as you can see here. Moreover, the local and international researchers mostly try to investigate the relationship between teacher self-efficacy and some other variables, such professional development, burnout, personality types. So this is cited from Alibakhshi back in 2011. So this study is dated back in 2011, and there is only one study that cited this paper in regard to TSE, which is the relationship between Iranian EFL teachers, their personality, and students' motivation by M.K. Sabat in 2018. So it shows that there is a continuity between the researcher's previous study with the current study. However, there is quite a gap in the time for both studies and lack of supporting evidence. Now, we will look at the literature review. The literature review is divided into two, which are teacher self-efficacy origins and empirical studies on the consequences of teacher self-efficacy. Now, we will look at the first part, which is teacher self-efficacy origin. The first part of TSE origin explains the definitions of self-efficacy in general, which is defined as beliefs in one's capabilities to organize and execute courses of actions required to manage prospective situations. The literature review also included self-efficacy as a concept that deals with the ability of an individual to organize plans and actions they use to deal with the challenges. So there is one citation for both definitions and concept. The second part in the teacher self-efficacy origin explains that self-efficacy beliefs are a powerful mediators for behavioral change, which can affect our motivations and influence our failures and success. There are 5 citations used for this statement. And the last part of TSE origin explains self-efficacy in the field of education. Number 1, self-efficacy and learners' achievement. And number 2, it explains self-efficacy and teachers' motivations. There are 5 citations for each. The second part of the literature review is empirical studies on TSE consequences, where the first part discusses positive effect of TSE and teaching effectiveness, TSE effects on job satisfaction, TSE effects on perfectionism, and TSE effects on emotional intelligence. And the second part of empirical studies discusses negative effect of TSE, which includes teachers burnout, relationship of TSE and teachers burnout, and investigations on how relevant indicators and TSE are related, and stress grouping strategies and general of self-efficacy. And the last part of the empirical studies explains self-efficacy and the effects on performance, formalizations and centralizations, and employee self-efficacy. So as we can see, the number that I put in bracket is the number of citations used for each of the studies. Now, we will look at the analysis of the literature review. In the analysis of the literature review, the researchers employed an extensive literature review. The researchers also include overview of the literature area, which includes historical and contemporary sources related to teacher self-efficacy into the context. The oldest study dated back in 1986, and the most recent study was done in 2019. The researchers managed to provide similarities and differences in the studies related to the TSE consequences. Besides, the researchers also managed to include studies with convincing evidence to support assertion. For example, Bandura has conducted several studies on TSE to provide evidence to his assertion that our belief in our abilities powerfully affects our behavior, motivations, and ultimately influence our success and failure. The researchers have cited 6 related studies. Next, the researchers categorized the literature review into 2, which are studies on teacher self-efficacy origin and empirical studies on the consequences of teacher self-efficacy. The teacher self-efficacy theory is adequately discussed in the teacher self-efficacy origin, while the empirical studies on the consequences of teacher self-efficacy discuss the relationship between the independent and dependent variables of the study. Besides, the literature is mainly from primary sources, which are published research studies. Next, the number of cited studies are 22 for teacher self-efficacy origin and 14 for teacher self-efficacy consequences is adequate. The literature review has also fulfilled the objective of the study by providing empirical studies on teacher self-efficacy. And the flow of the writing is direct, clear, and focused. In the literature review, the researchers have identified gaps in the research study. For example, from the empirical studies, we have taken 5 research papers that were cited in the study to show what method is used in their research studies. As we can see, the first study used ANOVA, while the second study used t-test and ANOVA. The third study used structural equation modeling analysis, while the fourth study used multiple group of structural modeling analysis. The last study used partial least square structure equations modeling and polynomial regressions. So all of these 5 methods are quantitative methods. However, based on the literature review, the researchers should provide more studies for the opposing views, where only 2 studies were mentioned. Besides, the researchers included past studies that only relate to self-efficacy of public employees instead of teachers, as teacher self-efficacy might be relevant and specific towards the field of education. Next, we will look at the methods. The researchers employed a phenomenological inquiry to explore the antecedents of language teachers from their own eyes. A phenomenology inquiry is an attempt to deal with inner experiences unproved in everyday life. According to Merriam, in 2002, taken from page 7. So the method used aligned with the research question that seek to explore the phenomenon or consequences of teacher self-efficacy among EFL teachers. So it is best to use these qualitative methods as it explores the innate experiences of the participants in order to identify meaning related to the phenomenon. As for the sampling, purposive sampling method was chosen. The respondents satisfy a certain qualities to teacher self-efficacy, and they focus on the characteristics and interests of the study. They should not take other teachers teaching different subjects to conduct the research, so it maintains the homogeneity of the sample. As for the sample size, 20 EFL teachers from Zaban Kedeh Mali Language Institute sufficient for a qualitative study. So 10 male and 10 female ranging from age 30 to 42 and different years of teaching experience are selected to avoid bias and maintain the stability and consistency of the responses. The researchers adhere to research ethics and informed consent. The participants were given pertinent information related to the studies, and permission was taken in written form. To ensure the safety of the participants, they were contacted through email and telephone before they signed written consent, and participants were also assigned with pseudonym for protections of privacy and confidentiality. Next, we will look at the instruments. There are two instruments that are being used, which are number 1, Teacher's Sense of Efficacy Scale long form instrument, and number 2 is Interview Checklist. For the first instrument, which is the Teacher's Sense of Efficacy Scale, it is adopted from Hanens-Moran and Hoy in 2007, and this instrument was used as a scale for screening efficacious teachers, while the interview checklist was developed by the researchers. The researchers included questions addressing the participants' feeling towards efficacious teachers, and they also included questions on the effects of high degree self-efficacy in the teaching area. We will analyze the instruments by referring to 3 qualities of research instruments, which are validity, reliability, and practicality. So for number 1 is validity. The content of the instruments is reviewed by experts, and the interview checklist is developed as a new instrument to validate the long-form instrument. The checklist was worded in an attentive manner, and it was reviewed by 5 teacher educators who is the experts in qualitative research and teacher education. And it is edited according to the feedbacks of the experts. Number 2, we will look at the reliability. All interviews were audio taped for accuracy and reliability. And number 3 is practicality. The instrument is practical to conduct as the participants are reachable, and the time spent for the research is not too long and it's not too short. The researchers only spent 3 months to complete the interviews. And the instrument used are systematic and easy to administer. So all this shows that the instruments used are practical.
Hi everyone, so I am Yanyi. Thank you for Shazwani's presentation analysis. I will be continuing with results, findings, and the conclusion of the entire study. So first of all, the author had categorized the results into 3 major parts. The first, consequences, which is teaching/learning processes. The second one is the learner/student related consequences. And the third major one is the teacher's psychological consequences. So for the first major consequences, the result found out that TSE has a positive consequences for teachers' instructional behaviors and strategies. And under this domain, it has 3 subdomains. So the first is the pedagogical/instructional support. The second one is the classroom management. And the third one is the emotional support. So under the subdomain, it has 8 subcategories of dimensions, and they all were listed out from the largest percentages until the smallest. Okay, let's look at the first one, overall instructional development. So TSE contributes to different instructional practices such as the process-oriented instruction or the ability to use effective teaching strategies and so on. And the authors will include like a quote from the respondent. So one of them said that I always try to use very effective strategies for teaching and sometimes do their best about knowing the effective strategies, which the other language teachers in the countries use to teach. The second one would be the support for learners' language development. And they found out that about 70% suggested that TSE greatly contribute to the teaching quality and strategies, and high efficacious teachers use communicatively oriented language strategies. The third dimension would be employing effective instructional strategies, and about 80% of them suggested that teachers with high teaching efficacy attempt to use teaching methods and strategies congruent to the practice. And the next dimension is employing updated learning-centered approaches, where high self-efficacy will contribute to the use of innovative teaching approaches, such as learner-oriented approaches. So one of them said that recent teaching methods focus on learner-centered issues in teaching instead of teacher-centered. Next up is using computer and technology in classes. So higher teacher with higher TSE will use more computer and technology in their classes instead of just books and blackboards or whiteboards. Next dimension would be the instructional support to the colleagues. So 60 of them suggested that teachers with high self-efficacy often support their colleagues. So they will exchange like how their problems and how they manage or teach in their classrooms, and will ask solutions or transfer knowledge among themselves. Next up, professional development. 50% of them indicate that teachers with high self-efficacy either formally or informally to develop their profession. So for example, one of them developed his or her teaching through attending training centers or relevant workshops. And the last one under the pedagogical / instructional support is teacher autonomy. So they suggested that, instructional support is another consequence. As efficacious teachers, they often have autonomy in selecting materials, activities, and assessment. And they can make a change in the content of the syllabus instead of just following them. Next up, classroom management. So same thing, the subcategories of classroom management can be found here. There are 3 as well, and they are also ordered using the percentages from the highest to the lowest. So the first one, teaching to exceptional or heterogeneous students. So teachers with high efficacy, they are less anxious and are more capable of teaching to either highly talented language learners or those with learning abilities. And they are usually more tolerant. They also rarely exclude students from their class. And also, they have better classroom behavior management, where they are able to organize students' behaviors while teaching. So especially with students, with emotional behavior, whether they are shy, they're social, they have social rejection or hostile or very hyperactive in class. And the next one would be emotional support. Under this one, it has 4 dimensions. First one is the classroom emotional climate. So teachers with high TSE often create a supportive environment in the classroom. And they also appreciate students' perspective, whether it's their views, their interests, or motivations. And teachers with high self-efficacy also tend to promote learner autonomy. And of course, teachers with high TSE, they often have a good relationship with their students, and they tend to be more friendly. So let's move on to the second major consequences, which is the learner-student related. And under this domain, it has 3 subdomains as well. The first one, general achievement, students' motivation, and the last one, students' autonomy. And this is another table with percentages listed out. So the first one, general achievement, with the most highest percentage, TSE affects language learners' general knowledge and their communicative competence. And of course, they will affect students' motivation. So teacher with high TSE often make students' self-efficacy, engagement, and school investment better if they're higher. And of course, students' autonomy. So highly efficacious teachers tend to promote learner autonomy, just like one of the dimensions just now mentioned. So the last major consequences would be teacher psychological consequences. And under this one, there are 4 psychological traits were reported. So the first one is burnout filtering, job satisfaction, teacher commitment, and teacher retention. And the findings found out that about 85% of the participants argued that the rate of burnout among them is very low because since they are highly efficacious teacher and they never feel tired even though they teach like 30 hours a week. The second one would be teachers' job satisfaction. So higher TSE means that they are more satisfied with their job and they think that it has a very good salary and don't like to quit. The third one would be teachers' commitment, and about 75% of them believe that TSE is a positive predictor of occupational commitment. So higher TSE, they will be more committed to the school or institute. And when it comes to teachers' retention, higher TSE means that they attempt to remain longer in teaching professions, and the level of absenteeism is lower compared to those who are always absent. So this is the critical analysis for findings. We found out that the researchers have managed to analyze the data thematically and order them starting from a major consequences and then moving on to the less major ones. And they also provide a table with percentages starting from the largest until the smallest for every category before going into details of the findings. And they also provide a quote or example almost for every subcategories of the consequences. However, we also found out that researchers are unable to give more detailed explanation for some of the subcategories or subtopics. So, for example, like the second major consequences just now, there weren't any like quotation or from the interview where they didn't, this part, learner/student related consequences. They didn't really give like any quotes or examples from the interview. And we also think that the authors should increase the indent of the subtopics instead of using different fonts, because we found out that it is a little hard to detect which ones are the main and which ones are the subcategories. So this is the example from the paper. This one is what I highlighted. This one is what I highlighted actually, because it's easier for me to detect. This one is like the major consequences, and under the major consequences, it's the subcategories, and they just use like different fonts instead of increase the indent, increase the indent for the subcategory, so it will be easier for readers to detect which one. As for the discussion, the paper explored the consequences of EFL teachers' self-efficacy and their content analyzed. And of course, this finding is consistent with the findings of some scholars who suggest that, instructional strategies, behaviors, and practices where teacher used to encourage students' cognitive development might partly be determined by the self-efficacy or the TSE. And after reading all the discussion, we found out that the researchers have provided a lot of previous studies as evidence to every category. There are 3 major ones, and each and every major or subcategories, they provide a lot of previous studies. And apart from just merely self-explanation or content from the respondents. However, we found out that most citations given were somehow a little bit outdated, as it dated the earliest from the 90s, and the latest one, which is 2013, which is a little bit outdated if we have to say, compared to, better or later study. So the researchers also provided some implications and gave some reason as to why this study has been conducted and why is it important or practical to help English teachers in this area. So I think it's good. And this is like the conclusion from the paper. It's like a very good conclusion to a very clear picture of what the entire paper is about. And I think it's a very good thing. However, of course, there are limitations and suggestions. For this part, these are the limitations and suggestions listed out by the researchers, where the first one, this research was not able to explore the antecedents of teachers' self-efficacy, and they were not able to show the relationship between each of the extracted consequences and teachers' like self-efficacy. And of course, teachers' teaching experience or their personality or educational backgrounds were also not taken into account, which may be like affect the results. And the last one would be the other researchers are recommended to investigate the relationship between teachers, TSE, and maybe any of the consequences and antecedents through structural equation modeling. So for us, we think that the authors can consider explaining the findings and discussion together. For example, just now, instead of what the authors did were explaining all the findings and then later on moving on to discussion with citations and from previous studies. But we find that maybe if they start with findings with, let's say, the first category and then continue with the discussion, like one paragraph of discussion and citations from previous study, it might be easier for reader to relate it back to the data. And then we go next up to the second major consequences, and then another paragraph with the discussions and citations. It might be a better way for readers to relate back to the data instead of flipping it back and forth. So this way it is more convenient to refer back and maybe relate to the discussions like directly. And maybe they could try carrying out the study in a mixed method, because quantitative study can generalize like in a larger population, and from the quantitative study you will have the interview like what the researchers did to get know of the how and whys of the teachers choose their selections or options. So this is the Q&A from us to all of you, and we hope you can provide some feedbacks or your own opinions about TSE. So this is all from our group. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.